The feed room is the title of the final section of the novel, and what it points to is the event that leads to the breakthrough in Raineys' marriage. It also signifies the end of the Civil War in the section that we discussed the last time we got together. The Civil War that threatened to end the marriage effectively comes to an end in the feed room. The feed room actually represents two things in the book, I think. The feed room itself is an area in the back of Raineys' father's store, and an important decision that she makes as her marriage to Charles continues is that she's going to take a part-time job, and the job she takes is in her father's store. In working for her father, she finds out a number of things that are surprising to her that teach her the lesson that her parents are not as entirely consistent in their own values as she had believed herself. In other words, this very solid system of belief and practice that she'd grown up with has some cracks in it, and she finds that things are not always what they appear on the surface. Well, to get back to the feed room itself, what it is literally is a kind of storage area in the back of the store called the feed room because that's where feed is kept that's sold to farmers in this rural region. But symbolically, the feed room has at least two meanings. First, for her it comes to represent the unpublic and unacknowledged part of her father's business, one that clashes with what you might call the official family morality. Okay, so it represents the underside of her father's business, one might say. But secondly, the feed room comes to represent too her own sexual liberation, and thus, in the terms the novel lays out, it represents hope for her marriage with her more worldly husband. And remember, part of the contrast between Rainey and Charles is that Charles has seen more of the world. He's been in the Army. He's from the big city of Atlanta. Rainey has hardly ever left the confines of Lister and the surrounding towns except to go to the beach for a vacation with her family every year. And so what happens eventually in the feed room represents hope that she'll be able to make a lasting connection with her more worldly husband. Okay, let me be a little more specific about those two things, those two different significations of the feed room. First of all, the feed room, this area at the back of the store, turns out to be a convenient rendezvous hideaway for Sneads. Sneads is the bachelor employee of Rainey's father, the guy who keeps the store open and runs a cash register and who's does most of the meeting and greeting of the public who comes in. Well, Sneads is no better than he should be, to use a phrase that you see sometimes in 19th century novels, usually applied to a certain type of woman in those novels. But Sneads is willing to do some things that, well, they raise Rainey's eyebrows and initially bring out outrage in her. One of the things that Sneads does to aid the store operation is to sell porno men's magazines. He orders them, he keeps them hidden, keeps them behind the counter, and he has a select clientele of males who come in regularly to buy their favorite magazines from him. By the way, Rainey is shocked one day to find out that one of Sneads' customers is a man near and dear to herself. All right, so that's one aspect of Sneads' operation in the store. Rainey does bring up to her father that this sort of thing is going on, and she is also surprised that her father seems to be indifferent to the moral consequences. Her father says, well, I could stop this kind of thing from going on, but it does bring in a big profit, and those guys are going to buy those magazines somewhere. So learning through Sneads about this activity that's going on in his father's store raises questions in Rainey's mind about what she had thought to be this rather monolithic and universally shared morality amongst her family. But to get back to the feed room itself, one of the places that Sneads takes some of his own, some of the merchandise that he sells, is back to the feed room, which is also a rendezvous point for him and Thomasina Huggins, the woman that Rainey calls the town hussy. Her husband has gone off to Alaska, is the word in town, and she's after Sneads, is what everybody says. Well, one Saturday evening, Rainey discovers that she's out of eggs. The store is closed, but since she's working there, she's got a key to it, and she goes back to the store to get a carton of eggs, sees the light on, and discovers that Sneads and Thomasina Huggins are back there on a little surreptitious date, shall we say, in the feed room. All right, so the feed room represents this kind of underside, the unpublic and unacknowledged part of what's going on in her father's store and her father's business. Rather surprisingly, though, perhaps, the feed room also is the spot where she and Charles end up one night after hours. And what happens in the feed room this time is that Rainey, to her own surprise, ends up seducing Charles in the feed room. Well, this event is an important one for a couple reasons. First of all, structurally in the book, it's the other side of the parentheses, one might say, to Rainey's wedding night. If you recall, in one of those early chapters, Rainey reports that her wedding night with Charles was a disaster that left her in tears, because Charles's idea of what should happen on their wedding night was quite different from hers. If you recall, her idea of what should happen is that they would take off their clothes in the dark, get under the covers, and she would let Charles do his duty. That was her idea of the wedding night. When Charles wanted to be more adventurous, Rainey was upset, and their first serious tiff in their marriage occurred over sex. So when in the feed room, she puts a move on Charles. A huge change has come about. We're not in the honeymoon suite on the wedding night. We're in a semi public place, the back of the store, and of course, extremely important, noteworthy is the fact that now it's it's Rainey making the first move, shall we say. She's the one who's taken the initiative in this encounter. This event in the feed room comes after what appeared the likely breakup of the marriage in the Civil War section. Disagreements between these two have led to a separation. They've actually lived apart for a brief time. They've gone to a marriage counselor over a period of months. So this event in the feed room represents a new direction and new hope for their marriage. And what's happened then by the end of the novel, after this event, is that the separation between her and Charles that came in part from Rainey's over-attachment to her family and region, that separation has been overcome and they've reached a new state of compromise with new hope for their marriage that's symbolized by the coming of new life. In the final chapters of the book, Rainey is pregnant, and the looked-for birth of the child is going to give the marriage a new basis of solidity. It's important to see, though, as all this takes place, that Rainey has not rejected her family. She's not rejected where she came from. And that makes this book, this novel of self-discovery, different from some others. Rainey does not feel that in order to be married to Charles, she has to repudiate everything that she's believed in or stood for before. Instead, she comes to accept what she has grown up with on a new basis. There are a number of ways that this is demonstrated and developed in the novel. But the upshot of it all is that she has become more critical of her religious assumptions, more critical of the way her family does business, so to speak. So that while she still is very much attached to her family, and she's still a member of the Free Will Baptist Church that she grew up in, she now understands better why she is connected to those things. And she doesn't simply accept everything that she's been given. She has learned to judge and weigh because of questions that Charles has raised for her. So she still belongs to her family and her church, but in a more responsible way by the end of the novel, having learned to be critical of it. And on the other hand, she has learned to accept, if not always to embrace, at least to accept things that are important to Charles. And this note of compromise is gotten across very effectively, I think, at the end of the book, because what we see on the last page of the novel is a notice from the newspaper that has to do with the birth of a child. What we can see from that final notice in the newspaper is that Charles and Rainey have worked out a lot of their differences and come to a compromise on issues such as where they go to church, and they've learned to compromise on familial issues as well. So in this novel of self-discovery, we do have a character who starts out as naive. That's certainly a word we could apply to Rainey, who hasn't seen much of the world, but who's grown up a good deal in the course of the pages, not by rejecting and repudiating everything that she's grown up with, but by learning to be critical of it. And, of course, the agent for change in her case has been Charles, who himself has had to compromise. Well, that leads me to a final word about Rainey. One way of seeing that this novel is timely and deals with live issues is to recognize that Clyde Edgerton got into trouble over it. So let me tell you briefly about that. This information is a bit dated. The novel came out in 1985, so it's been a while now. But when Edgerton wrote this book, he was teaching for the School of Education at Campbell University, a school related to the North Carolina Baptist Convention. And administrators at the school, when the novel came out, became concerned that the novel treats Baptists satirically enough and critically enough that people who support the denomination might not like what they read. They considered the book Rainey controversial and believed that people could read the novel and think that Edgerton was making fun of Baptists. And out of that kind of concern, they decided not to give him a new teaching contract the next year after the novel came out. Okay, well, that led to a number of exchanges between him and the administration. The upshot of it, practically speaking, was that he eventually took employment at another school and left the faculty of Campbell completely. But as far as the administration's concerns about the novel and what you could see as an attack on Edgerton and a rejection of his book in a certain sense, I think for myself that was a misguided action because it seems to me that a careful, sympathetic reading of the novel shows, as I've tried to say, that while the book is critical of Rainey's Baptist beliefs, and it is satirical, there are many points at which her naivete is comical. We've talked in class previously about the fact that Rainey insists that Jesus never talked to prostitutes, which just shows that she hadn't read the Bible very carefully. So there is some fun here. There is some satire, and her innocence and naivete is criticized. But the book is far from rejecting or repudiating everything that Rainey believes in religiously, and certainly she herself does not do that. So it seems to me that even though the book is critical of some aspects of her religiosity, it's in an overall sense actually affirmative of her own convictions, and I think it's clear that to be plain about it, her religion has done a lot of good things for her and her family. So I think this controversy, the Campbell controversy, you might say, is instructive for showing us that these are issues that people do still struggle with, and that Rainey is a good example of this ongoing process of self-discovery in the South.